If a book can change the way you see the world, this is where you'll find it. I'm Karo Chen. Let's explore together the books that truly shape our destinies. Today we're tackling a tough one, The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. I'm not sure I can explain it perfectly, but I do hope you'll walk away with something valuable after listening. All right, let's get started. Right from the start, some people might ask, The Wealth of Nations was written over 200 years ago. Now that we're in the digital economy era, is it still relevant? Actually, a lot of the things we struggle with every day, like why people in the same job get paid differently, why some industries make money easily while others struggle, or whether the government should control prices. All of these questions follow the same logic Adam Smith explained in his book. Let's take a simple, everyday example. This morning you bought a cup of soy milk and a steamed bun. From the farmer planting soybeans and grinding them into flour, to the shop kneading dough and steaming buns, and finally to you scanning your phone to pay. Behind all that lies the logic of how division of labor increases efficiency, how money circulates, and how prices are formed. That's the very core of the wealth of nations. You might not realize it, but what Smith was really discussing wasn't some old, boring economics. It was how ordinary people can actually understand the relationship between money and everyday life. Now let's talk about some common misunderstandings. Some people think this book is only for experts and full of lofty theories. But when Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, he intentionally used lots of real-life examples, like the division of labor in a pin factory, or the profit differences between a baker and a butcher, so that ordinary people could understand the very down-to-earth questions he was trying to answer. How can a nation become rich? How can ordinary people live better lives? More importantly, The Wealth of Nations helps us avoid some common misconceptions. Many people think that having more money automatically means being wealthier. But Smith reminded us that real wealth isn't gold or silver. It's the goods and services that meet people's needs. A country sitting on piles of gold but lacking food and clothing isn't truly rich. And that truth still applies today. When we manage our money or read economic news, we shouldn't just focus on the numbers. We should think about how much real value those numbers can actually buy. So let's follow Smith's way of thinking, starting from the question, what is wealth, really? Then we'll break down division of labor, money, and prices step by step. These are the core codes of the economy. Once you understand these, whether you're analyzing industry trends, planning your career, or managing your finances, everything becomes clearer. After all, understanding how wealth is created, distributed, and grown has always been the foundation for living a good life. To really understand the wealth of nations, we first need to get one core idea straight. What exactly is wealth? If we don't figure that out first, everything that follows, division of labor, money, and prices, will easily go off track. Let's start with the common misunderstanding people had back when Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. At that time, Europe was obsessed with mercantilism, the idea that the more gold and silver a country had, the richer it was. Nations treated gold and silver like treasures. They dug up mines like crazy, fought wars for colonies just to seize precious metals, and even made laws banning gold and silver exports, terrified that their wealth would slip away. Take Spain, for example. After conquering the Americas, they found huge silver mines and started hoarding silver, thinking that would make them rich forever. But Smith immediately saw the problem. Can gold and silver be eaten or worn? He gave a very down-to-earth example. Imagine two countries. Country A has rooms full of gold but suffers poor harvests year after year. People are hungry, cold, and don't even have enough firewood for winter. Country B, on the other hand, doesn't have much gold, but has fertile land producing enough grain, factories weaving warm clothes, and families living comfortably. Which country is truly richer? Obviously, Country B. Because what really makes people live better lives isn't cold metal. It's the goods and services that meet their needs. Food, clothing, housing, craftsmanship, medical care. These are real wealth. Smith made it clear in his book. The essence of wealth is the total amount of goods and services produced each year through labor. There are two key parts here. First, labor production. Without people working, no goods exist. Second, total output. It's not about how much one person has, but how much the whole nation can provide to meet people's needs. A farmer growing wheat, a tailor making clothes, even a barber cutting hair. All of these are forms of wealth because they directly satisfy people's real needs. Let's dig a little deeper. Why was mercantilism wrong? Because it mistook the tool of wealth for wealth itself. Gold and silver, what later became money, are just tools for exchange. It's like when you pay with your phone. The numbers on your screen aren't wealth. The milk and bread you can actually buy are. For example, if a country prints tons of money but doesn't increase its goods, what happens? The money loses value. What used to cost $1 now costs $3. That's inflation. Smith saw this clearly. Money is only a medium of exchange, not the essence of wealth. Some people might ask, so does that mean gold and silver are useless? Of course not. They're useful, but only for helping goods circulate. Say you've got extra eggs and you want a pair of shoes. It's hard to find someone who both has extra shoes and wants eggs. But if you first exchange your eggs for silver, then use that silver to buy shoes, everything becomes easier. Gold and silver only have value because of what they can buy. If they can't be exchanged for goods, they're no different from ordinary rocks. Here we should pay attention to one of Smith's most important distinctions: nominal wealth versus real wealth. Nominal wealth is how much money you have. Real wealth is how much stuff that money can actually buy. For example, 10 years ago, $100 could buy 50 kilos of rice. Now that same $100 only buys 20 kilos. The number hasn't changed much, but your real wealth has gone down. That's why Smith kept stressing, don't focus on the amount of money, focus on how much labor can produce. In modern terms, when we measure a country's economy, we don't just look at its foreign reserves. That's like counting old gold and silver. We look at GDP, the total value of goods and services produced. Take China, for instance. Its growth didn't come from hoarding gold, but from farmers growing more crops, factories making more cars and appliances, and the service sector offering more healthcare and education. That's exactly what Smith called the growth of real wealth. And this brings us naturally to the next part: division of labor. Since wealth comes from the total goods produced by labor, the next big question is, how can labor produce more? Smith's answer: division of labor. When one person tries to do everything alone, efficiency is low. But when the work is divided among different people, productivity can multiply several times over. That's the real engine of wealth growth. In the next section, we'll dive into division of labor in detail, how exactly it increases production and makes everyone richer. Once we understand that wealth is essentially the total amount of goods produced by labor, the next question is, how can we make labor produce more goods? Adam Smith gives his answer right at the start of The Wealth of Nations. The key is the division of labor. He even says that division of labor is the fundamental cause of national wealth growth. Even today, that insight hits right at the heart of economic development. Let's start with Smith's famous pin factory example. He carefully noted that if one worker, without any division of labor, tried to make pins alone, from drawing the wire, straightening it, cutting, sharpening, attaching the head, and polishing, it would be a miracle if he made 20 pins a day. But when the process was divided into 18 distinct steps, with 18 workers each doing one specific task, one drawing the wire, one straightening, one sharpening, and so on, the result was astonishing. Each worker could now produce about 4,800 pins a day. That's a 240-fold increase in productivity. This wasn't theory. It was Smith's real observation. Division of labor works like a turbocharger for human effort, letting the same number of people create far more goods than before. So why does division of labor work such magic? Smith broke it down into 3 core reasons, and each one still applies to our everyday lives. The first reason is improved skill. What we call practice makes perfect. When a person does the same task every day, their technique becomes sharper, and their speed naturally increases. Take a baker, for example. The one who only kneads dough will do it far better and faster than someone who kneads and bakes at the same time. Or think of a restaurant kitchen. The chef who only chops vegetables works faster and cleaner than the one who chops, fries, and serves all at once. Smith said that repetitive work builds muscle memory. You don't have to think hard about every move, it just flows. That's the most direct reason division of labor boosts efficiency. The second reason is reduced time waste. If one person tries to do multiple kinds of work, say, farming and weaving, they have to constantly switch tools and environments. That switching time is all wasted. But with division of labor, everyone sticks to one task, saving the time lost on transitions. For example, at home, if you're cooking and cleaning at the same time, you waste time switching between washing dishes and sweeping floors. But if two people split the tasks, one cooks, one cleans, you finish much faster. Smith stressed that this kind of wasted time is far greater than we realize, and division of labor eliminates it almost entirely. The third reason is even more crucial. It sparks invention. When someone focuses on one task day after day, they naturally start thinking, is there an easier way to do this? Many labor-saving tools were born exactly that way. A pin worker who sharpens all day might design a sharper blade or a mold to hold the wire steady. A textile worker might invent a tool to speed up winding thread. Smith explained that by narrowing people's focus, division of labor helps them spot opportunities for improvement. That's why it drives technological progress, and those innovations, in turn, push productivity even higher, creating a positive cycle from division to invention to efficiency. Now let's zoom out and look at the impact of division of labor on society as a whole. The variety of goods we enjoy today all come from it. Take your clothes, for instance. Farmers grow the cotton, spinners turn it into thread, weavers make fabric, factories turn that fabric into clothes. Designers create the styles and transporters deliver them to stores. Miss any step, and that shirt never reaches you. Or your smartphone. Its chips, screens, batteries, and cameras all come from different factories around the world, assembled later in one plant. Smith could never have imagined division of labor on a global scale, but he saw the principle clearly. The finer the division, the more people can participate, and the greater the total output, and the greater the wealth of society. There's another point that's easy to miss. Division of labor doesn't just improve efficiency, it makes skills more accessible. For example, building a whole car is tough, but tightening bolts or fitting tires? That's something an ordinary person can learn quickly. This means more people can join the production process, boosting employment and expanding output. That's one reason division of labor helps wealth reach more people. And that brings us naturally to the next topic, money. Division of labor creates a new challenge. If everyone makes only one kind of product, you make shoes, I grow grain, we need to trade. But we can't keep swapping shoes for grain every time. If I want clothes, I'd have to find someone who makes them and also happens to need grain. That's just too inconvenient. So people needed a universal medium that everyone would accept to make these trades easier. That medium, of course, is money, the next part we'll talk about. In the last part, we talked about how the division of labor works like an engine. It helps people produce far more goods, much more efficiently. You grow grain, I make tools, he weaves cloth. But here comes the problem. If everyone only makes one kind of thing, how do we get the other stuff we need? That's where exchange comes in, and money was born out of the difficulties of that exchange. Let's go back to the time before money and see just how troublesome barter really was. Imagine you're a farmer who grows wheat. After the harvest, you have extra grain and want to trade it for a warm coat for winter. First, you'd have to find a tailor who happens to have an extra coat. That's already tough. But even if you find one, that tailor also has to want your wheat. If he's already stocked up on food and only needs a hoe, your trade falls apart. So you might take your wheat to a blacksmith to get a hoe, then trade that hoe to the tailor for a coat. But if the blacksmith doesn't want wheat either, you're stuck again. Smith called this the double coincidence of wants. Both sides have to want exactly what the other has for the exchange to work. It's wildly inefficient and can't possibly support the massive amount of trade division of labor creates. Over time, people came up with a workaround. They'd first trade their goods for something everyone was willing to accept, and then use that to buy what they actually needed. For instance, at first people noticed that grain or livestock were widely desired, so someone might trade wheat for rice, then rice for cloth. Later they realized that shells and certain stones were easier to carry and store, so these became more common exchange tools. Smith noted that in many early tribes, shells or animal skins served this same role. They were the earliest forms of money. But those early forms had big drawbacks. Some couldn't be divided, like a cow. You can't just split it in half to buy half a bolt of cloth. Others spoiled easily. Grain goes bad over time. Eventually, people discovered that metals, like gold, silver, and copper, solved all these problems perfectly. First, metal can be divided easily. You can split a piece of gold into smaller bits to trade for goods of different value. Second, it doesn't spoil. Bury it for decades and it'll still be fine, making it great for long-term storage. Third, metals have a relatively stable supply. You can't just pick them up anywhere like seashells, which helps them retain value. And so, metals gradually became the main medium of exchange, and real money was born. Here's something Smith really wanted us to remember. Money is not wealth, it's just a tool for exchange. It's like when you pay with your phone. The numbers on the screen aren't your wealth, it's the bread and milk you can buy with them that matter. In ancient times, people used silver to buy things, but silver itself wasn't wealth either. It was simply the bridge that connected one person's labor, say a farmer's wheat or a craftsman's tools, to another person's labor. Smith used a vivid metaphor. Money is like the wheel of a cart. It makes the vehicle of trade move faster, but the wheel itself isn't the destination. A mistake many people still make today is confusing money with wealth, thinking the more cash you hold, the richer you are. But Smith warned long ago, if a country prints more and more money without increasing the total goods available, the result is simply that money loses value. What used to cost 1 ounce of silver now costs 3. That's inflation. The value of money depends entirely on how much it can buy. If it can't buy real goods, then no matter how much you have, it's just useless metal or numbers on a screen. Now, let's look at how essential money is to division of labor. Once money existed, the whole system could finally run smoothly. Farmers no longer had to worry about trading wheat for clothes. They could just sell their wheat for silver. Tailors didn't have to stress about swapping clothes for tools. They could simply buy them. Money acts like oil in an engine, helping the vast flow of goods created by specialization move freely. It lets everyone exchange their own specialized work for the wide variety of things they need. That's why Smith said that without money, division of labor could never fully develop. And that brings up a new question. Now that money exists, how do we decide how much things should cost? Why does 1 yard of cloth sell for 1 ounce of silver while another costs 2? Why is a loaf of bread so much cheaper than a coat? The logic behind those differences is the secret of price. The core topic we'll unpack next. Once you understand how prices are set, you can truly see the connection between money and goods, and understand the real economic logic behind what you buy and what you earn. Once we have money as a medium of exchange, we often ask, why is one thing expensive and another cheap? For example, a cup of milk tea might cost about $2, while a bottle of mineral water is only around 30 cents. A down jacket could sell for over $100 in winter, but only half that in summer. In The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith breaks down the mystery of price very clearly. At the core, there are only 2 questions. What makes up a price, and why do prices fluctuate? Let's start with the first question. According to Smith, any product's price is made up of 3 parts. He called them the 3 components of price. We can understand this easily with a simple example. Say you buy a steamed meat bun from a street vendor. What's hidden in that price? First, wages. The people kneading the dough, wrapping the buns, and selling them all need to be paid. Their labor cost goes into the price. Second, profit. The shop owner rents a space and buys flour and pork. He needs room to make some profit, or else he won't stay in business. Third, rent. The space he rents belongs to a landlord who collects rent, and that rent is also part of the bun's price. Whether it's milk tea, bottled water, or a down jacket, the price is always the sum of wages, profit, and rent. Only the proportions differ from one product to another. Let's take a clearer example, a branded down jacket. The wages include the designer's pay for drawing the pattern, the factory worker's sewing wages, and the store clerk's commissions. Profit includes the brand's operating profit and the distributor's sales margin. Rent covers the factory building rent and the store's rent, especially for downtown stores, where rent takes a much bigger share. Why are down jackets more expensive in winter? Besides higher demand, it's also because the raw materials, like down feathers, cost more during that season. And raw material costs eventually flow into wages or profits too. For example, the money paid to buy the feathers goes to the farmers. Their income is also a kind of labor reward in a broader sense. Now that we understand what makes up a price, let's look at the second question. Why does the price of the same product change? For instance, why are watermelons cheaper in summer but pricier in winter? Why are strawberries expensive when they first hit the market but cheaper later? Smith explained this using two types of prices, the natural price and the market price. These two ideas perfectly explain why prices fluctuate. The natural price is what a product should sell for. In the long run, the price of a steamed bun needs to cover the cost of flour and pork, plus workers' wages, the owner's reasonable profit, and the rent. Otherwise, the owner will lose money and eventually stop selling. A price that keeps producers willing to make and sell, without losing or excessively profiting, is the natural price. For example, for a milk tea shop, the natural price of a cup might be about $2, enough to pay rent, wages, and keep the shop running. If they sold it for, say, 70 cents long term, they couldn't even cover the cost, and the business would quickly shut down. The market price is what we actually pay. It goes up or down depending on supply and demand. Take watermelons, for example. In summer, when everyone wants them, demand surges, but supply can't always keep up, so prices rise above the natural price. In winter, supply is limited again, and prices go up too. But when spring arrives and watermelons flood the market, supply exceeds demand, and prices fall, sometimes even below the natural price. Smith said the market price swings like a pendulum, always moving around the natural price. If prices rise too high, more people start growing watermelons, increasing supply and pushing prices down. If prices fall too low, farmers stop planting them, supply drops, and prices rise again. We can see this around us too. Why do vegetable prices rise around the Lunar New Year? Because demand increases. Everyone's buying more food, while many farmers head home for the holidays, reducing supply. So the market price climbs above the natural price. After the holiday, demand drops, supply returns, and prices fall again. And why is rent in big cities much higher than in small ones? Because land in major cities is scarcer. Less supply, more people wanting to rent, which pushes up rent. That rent gets passed into the price of everything. Even the same cup of milk tea costs more in a big city, because the store's rent is higher. There's another point that's often overlooked. Different goods have different price elasticity, meaning their prices react differently to changes in supply and demand. For essentials like rice or water, even if prices rise a bit, people still need to buy them. Demand barely changes. But for luxury items or travel, when prices go up, many people simply choose not to buy, and demand drops sharply. Smith didn't use the modern term price elasticity, but he had already noticed this. The prices of necessities are far less affected by supply and demand than luxuries are. And this naturally brings us to another question. Since price is made up of wages, profit, and rent, who actually gets that money? Workers earn wages, business owners take profits, landlords collect rent. That's basically how wealth is distributed among people. For example, if a bun sells for about 30 cents, maybe 7 cents go to wages, 5 cents to profit, and 3 cents to rent, while the rest covers raw materials. And that raw material cost itself breaks down again. Part goes to farmers growing the wheat, part to the mill owner as profit, and part to the factory's rent. So, understanding how price is built up is actually understanding the foundation of wealth distribution. And in the next part, we'll dig deeper into how these three, wages, profits, and rent, are decided, and why some people earn more while others earn less. Once you understand that the price of goods is made up of wages, profit, and rent, you've basically uncovered the pattern of how wealth gets distributed. The total wealth produced by society eventually splits into three parts: going to workers, capitalists, and landlords. But why do some people make $10,000 a month while others only make a few thousand? Why are some industries insanely profitable, while others barely scrape by? Adam Smith explained the logic behind this in The Wealth of Nations, and every point he made still fits perfectly with real life today. Let's start with wages, the part that hits closest to home. A lot of people think wages are just something generous bosses decide to give, but Adam Smith made it clear long ago. Wages are determined by the supply and demand for labor. Just like goods in the market, when more people want something and there's less supply, the price goes up. Same goes for labor. If a certain job doesn't have enough workers, employers will raise pay to attract people. But if tons of people are competing for the same job, wages naturally stay low. Take software engineers or new energy engineers these days. Those fields are booming and need tons of workers, so their salaries are much higher than in traditional industries. On the other hand, jobs like clerical work don't see big pay raises because there are so many people who can do them. Besides supply and demand, there's another key factor that affects wages: how fast a country's wealth is growing. Smith said it's not about how rich a country already is, but how fast it's getting richer. Imagine two countries. Country A is already wealthy but hasn't grown for years. Companies aren't expanding, they don't need more workers, and wages barely move. Country B isn't as rich, but its economy keeps growing fast every year. Companies open new factories, expand production, and keep hiring, so wages rise with it. That's exactly what happened in China over the past few decades. Because the economy kept expanding, the demand for labor increased, and regular workers saw their monthly pay jump from a few dozen dollars to a few hundred. That's the logic of economic growth driving wage growth. Here's a counterintuitive point. Lower wages aren't always better for companies. If workers can't make enough to eat well or live decently, they won't have the energy to work, and they won't stay in their jobs for long. That means constant turnover and higher training costs. Smith noticed long ago that reasonable wages actually make workers more stable and motivated, which boosts productivity. It's the same reason why modern companies raise salaries or give benefits, not just out of kindness, but because it helps them keep good people and run more efficiently in the long run. Now let's talk about profit. A lot of people think profit comes from selling things at high prices, but Smith said the real driver is capital competition. When an industry has high profits, more investors rush in with their money to grab a share. Competition heats up. Some cut prices to attract customers, others spend more to improve quality, and eventually profits fall to a more reasonable level. Take the bubble tea industry, for example. A few years ago, every new shop was making a killing, but once everyone jumped in and opened stores everywhere, competition exploded, prices dropped, and profits shrank fast. There's another rule about profit. The more capital there is in one place, the lower the profit tends to be. In big cities, tons of business owners compete, whether it's restaurants or supermarkets, so the competition is fierce and margins are thin. But in smaller towns, where there's less capital and less competition, certain businesses can actually make more money. Smith gave an example. A grocery store in London might only earn about 10% profit, while one in a small village could make 20%, simply because there's less competition out there. Now let's talk about rent. On the surface, it looks like landlords just sit back and collect money, but there's logic behind it. The level of rent mainly depends on how scarce and how productive the land is. If a piece of land is in a great location, it can grow more crops or be used to build skyscrapers and malls. Then rent is high. In contrast, remote or poor quality land has low rent. For example, land in the city center brings in tons of foot traffic, so shops and office buildings there make big money. Naturally, landlords can charge high rent. But farmland in rural areas, where productivity is low, brings in much less. Smith also noticed something interesting. Farmland rent is the most stable. People always need to eat, no matter how the economy is doing, so demand for food doesn't change much. And that means farmland rent doesn't swing wildly. But land used for amusement parks or movie theaters depends on the economy. When times are bad, people spend less on fun, and rent on that land drops. That's why many landlords prefer leasing land for farming. It's more reliable income. Here's something important. Wages, profit, and rent aren't isolated. They constantly affect one another. If land rent goes up, factory owners face higher costs. They either cut their profit or raise prices. When prices rise, workers' living costs go up too, so they'll demand higher wages. The balance among these three factors ultimately determines how wealth gets divided among different groups in society. Now that we understand how wealth is divided, a new question comes up. Where should business owners put their capital? Agriculture, manufacturing, or retail? Each direction affects a country's economic growth in different ways. That's what we'll dig into next. Where capital goes. Because where money gets invested doesn't just change a business owner's profit, it determines how much wealth the entire society can create, and ultimately, how everyone lives. After talking about how wealth is distributed, we need to shift our focus to where wealth actually comes from, the capital that business owners use to make money. Adam Smith said in The Wealth of Nations that capital is like a seed. When you plant it in different kinds of soil, it yields completely different amounts of fruit, or wealth. He divided the uses of capital into 4 categories and even ranked them by how much they contribute to a nation's prosperity. Once you understand this ranking, you'll know where money should go to make society as a whole wealthier. First, let's be clear. When Smith talks about capital, he's not talking about pocket money or personal savings. He means the money that's actually used to produce goods and create more wealth. For instance, the money farmers spend on seeds, fertilizer, and tools, or the money factory owners use to buy equipment and hire workers. That's real capital because it generates more money. But if you just park your money in a bank account, or spend it all on luxury goods for yourself, that's not capital. It's not part of the production process, and it doesn't create new wealth. Now let's follow Smith's ranking and look at the 4 main ways capital can be used. The first one is agriculture, which he placed at the very top, as the most valuable use of capital. Why? Because agriculture directly produces the most basic necessities of life: food, vegetables, meat. These are essential for human survival, and they form the foundation for every other industry. Without farmers growing food, workers wouldn't have the strength to work, and factory owners couldn't even run their factories. Smith also noticed that agriculture has a special advantage: it creates extra value. For example, a farmer might plant 1 pound of wheat and harvest 10. After keeping some for food and next season's seeds, there's still extra grain left to trade for other goods. That surplus is new wealth for society. It's just like why our country has always valued agriculture and invested heavily in supporting farmers and improving farming technology. Agriculture is the ballast stone of the whole economy. When it's stable, every other industry can grow with confidence. The second category is manufacturing. Its role is to take raw materials from agriculture and turn them into useful goods. For instance, cotton can't be worn directly, but after processing in a textile mill it becomes cloth, and after that a clothing factory turns it into shirts and dresses. The same goes for wood. By itself it's not very useful, but once processed into furniture, it gains much more value. Smith said manufacturing increases the use value of goods, turning raw materials into finished products and creating more wealth in the process. Take 1 ton of cotton. Selling it raw might bring in $10,000, but turning it into fabric could earn $30,000. The third category is wholesale, what we now often call logistics. Its job is to move goods from where they're produced to where they're needed, solving the mismatch between production and demand. For example, fruits are abundant and cheap in the South, but people in the North may want them and can't get them. Wholesalers use their capital to transport those fruits northward, so northern consumers can enjoy them, and southern farmers can sell more. Smith pointed out that wholesale doesn't directly create goods, but it keeps the circulation of goods flowing, connecting regions, helping producers scale up, and letting everyone benefit from each other's products. But it's important to remember, wholesale only moves wealth around. Its value depends entirely on the goods already produced by agriculture and manufacturing, so its contribution is smaller than the first 2. The fourth type is retail, ranked last. Retailers sell goods directly to the end consumer, bridging the gap between wholesalers who sell in bulk and everyday buyers who just need a few items. For instance, A wholesaler might have 1,000 pieces of clothing, but a shopper only wants one. Retail stores take that stock and sell it piece by piece. Smith said retail ensures that goods reach their final users, making life more convenient for ordinary people. The convenience stores and supermarkets in our neighborhoods are perfect examples. They use their capital to buy inventory and open stores so we can get what we need anytime. But like wholesale, retail doesn't actually produce goods. It just transfers wealth. And since its reach is smaller than wholesale, its contribution to overall wealth is the smallest. Here's the key takeaway from Smith. Capital invested in agriculture and manufacturing creates new wealth, while capital in wholesale and retail merely circulates it. Of course, wholesale and retail are still important. Without them, goods wouldn't reach consumers at all. But if there's no agriculture or manufacturing producing those goods, then logistics and sales are like cooking without rice. A country that only trades and resells foreign goods, with no domestic farming or industry, has a fragile economy. If other nations stop supplying it, the country will quickly fall into trouble. On the other hand, a country with its own agriculture and manufacturing can still meet its basic needs even when the global situation changes, and its wealth grows much more steadily. Once we understand how different uses of capital affect wealth, a big question naturally comes up. Should the government control where capital goes? Should it encourage investment in agriculture and manufacturing, limit it in other sectors, or simply stay out of the way and let business owners decide for themselves? This leads us to one of Adam Smith's core ideas. How should the state treat the economy? That's what we'll talk about next. Should the government intervene or let go? Understanding this question helps us see what role the state should really play in economic development. Now that we've talked about where capital should go, there's a big question we can't avoid. Should the government interfere in the economy? For example, should it ban foreign imports to protect local businesses? Should it set price controls to stop owners from overcharging? Adam Smith devoted an entire section of The Wealth of Nations to criticizing excessive government interference. He introduced the famous idea of laissez-faire, which basically means the less the government meddles, the better the market runs. And the core idea behind this philosophy is what we all know as the invisible hand. Let's start with what Smith criticized: mercantilism. Back in his time, most European countries believed that to make a nation rich, you had to export more, import less, and earn as much foreign money as possible. To make that happen, they came up with all kinds of ridiculous policies. For example, Britain banned the import of foreign cotton cloth, afraid its own textile mills would lose business. France imposed high tariffs on imported wine so foreign wine would cost more than domestic wine. Some countries even forced merchants to ship goods only on their own national vessels, even if foreign ships were cheaper and faster. Smith immediately saw through the problem. These policies looked like they were protecting national interests, but in reality, they hurt ordinary people and local businesses. Take the cotton cloth ban. Without foreign competition, domestic textile mills had no pressure to innovate or cut costs. They could just raise prices, and who paid the price in the end? Ordinary people who just wanted affordable cloth. Or look at wine tariffs. Consumers had to pay extra for imported wine that offered better value, while local winemakers, protected from competition, got lazy and stopped improving their products. Smith said government intervention was like putting shackles on the market. It kept consumers from getting cheaper goods and robbed businesses of the drive to improve. So what's the solution? Smith's answer was laissez-faire. Let everyone and every business act freely in the market. Farmers should grow what they want. Factory owners should open whatever business they choose, and consumers should buy what they like, without government meddling. Why does this work? Because Smith discovered that there's an invisible hand in the market, one that guides people, while they chase their own interests, to unknowingly promote the good of society as a whole. Take a simple example. A bakery owner wants to make more money. He's acting out of self-interest. What does he do? He improves his baking skills to make better bread. He finds ways to cut costs so he can sell it cheaper. He might even keep his shop open longer so more customers can buy from him. As a result, the baker earns more money. Customers get tastier, cheaper bread, and society as a whole becomes wealthier. That's the invisible hand at work. Or think of a farmer. He wants to earn more, so he grows more crops and improves their quality. In the process, he not only increases his own income, but also provides more food for everyone else. Smith said people don't need to try to serve society. If everyone simply does their job well, the market naturally turns those individual efforts into collective progress. Of course, Smith never said the government should do nothing. He said the state should focus on what it should do, and leave everything else to the market. He clearly outlined 3 limited roles for government, and these are still the foundation for policy in many countries today. The first duty is national defense, building an army, maintaining security, and preventing foreign invasion. If a nation is under attack, people's property gets destroyed, businesses shut down, and the market can't function at all. Smith said national security is the foundation for market freedom. It's a responsibility the government must take on. The second role is maintaining justice, setting up police and courts to protect people's safety and property, and making sure contracts are honored. If theft, fraud, or wage defaults go unpunished, the market falls into chaos. No one would feel safe to work or do business. Smith believed the government should act as the referee of the market, ensuring everyone plays by the rules. No cheating, no monopolies. The third role is building public infrastructure. Some projects aren't profitable for private investors, but benefit everyone, like roads, bridges, ports, schools, and hospitals. These require big investments and take years to pay off, so private companies won't take them on. But without them, goods can't move, people can't get educated or treated, and the market can't grow. That is why the government must step in to build these public facilities and provide the foundation for the economy to function. It's important to note that Smith's idea of laissez-faire doesn't mean doing nothing. It means not interfering with normal market activity. For example, the government shouldn't set bread prices or tell farmers what crops they can grow, but it can punish sellers who sell expired bread and build roads to help farmers bring their crops to town. The difference is clear. One meddles with market choices, the other ensures a fair and efficient market environment. Once we understand Smith's idea of laissez-faire, we can see why so many countries open up industries for competition, why they fight monopolies, and why they protect small businesses and consumers. The logic behind all of this comes straight from Smith. Let the market take the lead, and let the government be the watchful guardian. Of course, as time went on, with economic crises, environmental issues, and other new challenges, later economists expanded and refined Smith's ideas. But one thing hasn't changed. The market remains the core engine of wealth creation, and the idea that government should intervene only when necessary is still as relevant as ever. Next, let's talk about what the wealth of nations has left us today. How do its ideas apply to our own work, investments, and society as a whole? And at the same time, we should also recognize its limitations, understanding which ideas need to evolve with the times. Only then can we truly apply the wisdom of the wealth of nations to real life. More than 200 years have passed, and many of the examples in the wealth of nations, like hand-weaving and textile factories, are long outdated. But Adam Smith's way of analyzing the economy still works like a master key. It helps us understand how today's workplace, investing, and market rules operate. This isn't just a classic to sit on a bookshelf. It's a practical guide you can actually apply to real life. We can see its true value from 2 perspectives, individual and social. Let's start with how it helps individuals. That's the part closest to our daily lives. First, it helps you choose the right career path. Smith said that industries with finer divisions of labor and greater demand tend to create more value. That logic still holds today. Take the new energy sector, for example. It's highly specialized, with roles in battery research, vehicle design, and autonomous driving. Demand is booming worldwide, so salaries are high and the growth potential is huge. Or look at artificial intelligence. There are roles like algorithm engineer, data labeler, and AI trainer, all in rising demand and offering strong career prospects. On the flip side, industries with vague divisions and shrinking demand, like traditional print media or outdated manual manufacturing, are seeing fewer opportunities. Once you understand the logic of specialization plus demand, you won't just chase high salaries now, you'll think about long-term potential too. Second, it helps you avoid investment traps. Smith repeatedly emphasized that wealth isn't money itself. It is the labor and capital that produce goods. That insight hits at the heart of many financial misconceptions. Some people think keeping money in the bank is safe, but if your interest rate is 2% and inflation is 3%, your purchasing power is actually shrinking. You can buy less with the same amount of money. Following Smith's logic, the smarter move is to turn your money into capital that creates value. That could mean investing in companies that produce quality goods through stocks or funds, or investing in yourself by learning new skills and increasing your labor value. For example, if someone spends YWord $10,000 on a programming course and later earns YWord $2,000 more every month, that's a return on human capital, far more meaningful than just saving the money. Third, it helps you understand the logic behind consumption. Why does the same product sell for more in big cities than in smaller ones? Smith would tell you, it's because of differences in rent and wages. Higher shop rents and staff wages naturally push prices up. Why are branded products more expensive than generic ones? Beyond quality, brand pricing also includes R&D and marketing costs, which are ultimately reflected in the price tag. Once you understand this, you won't blindly assume more expensive means better. You'll see that real value for money is about how well the price matches the cost and value behind it. Now, let's look at how it benefits society. The ideas in The Wealth of Nations still shape our economic systems today. First, they help us understand the importance of free competition. Smith said that competition makes products cheaper and better. Modern policies that break up monopolies and encourage small and medium-sized enterprises are essentially about protecting free competition. For example, years ago, some industries were dominated by just a few companies, leading to high prices and poor service. But once the government opened the market and more players joined, prices dropped and service improved. Look at the smartphone industry. Decades ago, there were only a few brands. But now, fierce global competition means consumers can buy better phones for less money. That is Smith's idea of free competition playing out in real life. It benefits every ordinary person. Second, it reminds us to value fair distribution of labor income. Smith believed that fair wages increase productivity. Today, when we talk about raising workers' incomes, guaranteeing fair pay for migrant workers, or improving social insurance systems, we're putting that idea into action. If workers don't receive fair compensation, not only does it hurt their quality of life, but essential jobs go unfilled. For example, if nurses are underpaid and overworked, we'll face a shortage that disrupts healthcare. Only when labor is fairly rewarded can production and society as a whole keep running smoothly. Third, it gives us a basic framework for the relationship between government and the market. Today's economy is far more complex than in Smith's time, with crises, pollution, and other challenges. But the principle of the market taking the lead, the government playing a supporting role, still holds. Governments don't directly interfere in production or pricing, but they support businesses through tax cuts, regulate against counterfeits, and build infrastructure to keep markets functioning. These are modern extensions of Smith's idea that the state should act as the watchman of the economy. Of course, we also have to recognize the limits of the wealth of nations. Smith lived during the early Industrial Revolution. He never saw monopoly capitalism, where multinational corporations dominate entire industries. He never experienced economic crises like overproduction leading to bankruptcies and unemployment. Nor could he foresee modern issues like environmental pollution. Later economists like Keynes and Pigou expanded on his work, suggesting that governments should intervene during recessions and that companies should bear environmental costs. But that's not Smith's fault. Every theory is bound by its time. What we should learn from him isn't just his conclusions, but his way of thinking. For example, use division of labor improves efficiency to analyze industries, supply and demand to understand price changes, and balance of interests to interpret wealth distribution. Once we grasp both the value and limits of the wealth of nations, we can confidently use Smith's logic to make sense of the modern world. When you see wages rising in a sector, you can ask, is it because of higher demand or greater specialization? When prices fluctuate, in the next part, we'll talk about how to apply Smith's logic. By this point, we don't need to be trapped by all the rigid theories in The Wealth of Nations. As long as we can turn its core logic into a pair of glasses to see the world more clearly, that's enough. In fact, many economic phenomena in our daily lives become crystal clear once you look at them through Adam Smith's lens. For example, if you notice that more and more breakfast shops are opening near your home, but the price of porridge is actually going down, that's exactly what Smith called free competition. The more owners join the market, the more they compete by lowering prices and improving quality, and in the end, consumers benefit the most. Another example, many young people would rather deliver food than work in factories. Don't just say they're afraid of hardship. Think about it with Smith's wage theory. Food delivery has high demand, plenty of jobs, and fast pay, while some factory jobs are shrinking and offer slow wage growth. It's not laziness. It's a rational choice based on better returns for their labor. And here's another one. Why are housing prices so high? Beyond simple supply and demand, you can also see the influence of land rent. Land in city centers is scarce, so rent or land transfer fees are high. Developers have to pay more to acquire land, and that cost inevitably ends up baked into the final housing price. And why are domestic brands getting stronger? That's the combined result of specialization and competition. Chinese brands are becoming more specialized in R&D, production, and after-sales service. With constant competition from global brands, they keep improving technology, cutting costs, and eventually winning over consumers. In fact, when you look at the world through The Wealth of Nations, it really comes down to three simple principles. First, don't just look at the surface. Always trace things back to their costs and supply-demand relationships. For instance, when a product's price goes up, ask yourself, is it because raw materials got more expensive or because demand increased? Second, don't judge everything by good or bad. Look at the balance of overall interests. For example, government subsidies for agriculture aren't a waste of money. They help ensure food security and motivate farmers to grow crops. That's a form of social balance that benefits everyone. Third, don't wait for miracles to fall from the sky. Believe in the value of labor and specialization. Whether you're an employee or an entrepreneur, focus deeply on one field, sharpen your skills, and create value through your work. That's the most reliable path to real wealth. Finally, The Wealth of Nations isn't a book about how to make money. It's a book about how to understand the world. It teaches us that wealth doesn't come from hoarding or grabbing, but from efficiency through division of labor, free competition, and rational creation by individuals. A nation doesn't become prosperous by over-regulating everything. It grows by giving markets space to breathe, protecting workers' rights, and acting as a responsible steward of its resources. So next time you read an economic headline or struggle with a career or spending decision, try thinking with Adam Smith's logic. You don't need complex formulas or fancy jargon. Just keep a few simple ideas in mind: cost, supply and demand, and competition. You'll realize that many confusing things in life suddenly make perfect sense. That's the power of a classic. It doesn't hand you a fish. It teaches you how to fish. And with that skill, you'll keep finding your own answers in life. And finally, congratulations. You've just finished another book.